Hello Internet, in this video I'm going to be talking about why basing your miniatures is so important. So I imagine most of the people that watch my YouTube videos are painters of some kind, and with that I would think that you're quite into your basing as well, but maybe you just don't give it a second thought. Maybe it's just a case of whacking on some sand, painting it black, giving it a quick dry brush and moving on. And whilst that's fine, I think it's quite important to pay quite a bit more attention to your bases. What you can see on the screen before you is me working on the base for my deffkilla wartrike. Now this is a HQ unit for the speed freaks portion of an orc army, and basically that just means it's a HQ unit on wheels. And for this miniature I wanted to have a base that told quite a story, so just sit back and watch that while I talk about the importance of basing. And we will start with something that I just said, and that is storytelling. When it comes to character units in my armies and stuff, I like to pay a bit more attention to their base. And this is not only to draw your eye towards them, because you can have them elevated a bit, standing higher than all of your other miniatures, but it's also because you start to tell a story with them. And this isn't just something that us hobbyists do either, it's something that the big companies actually recognise. For example, Games Workshop produced Ghazghkull Thraka, and is it Rupert Gilliman or something? Robert Gullyman? The big Space Marine dude? Blue blah blah blah. Him. Both these miniatures have thematic bases. They have pre-sculpted things for them to stand on. Not only does that allow their pose to be more dynamic, because one leg is a bit lifted up. Games Workshop do love a good dynamic rock, don't they? But also it just makes the ground a lot more interesting, and you can tell that they are in the heat of battle. There's debris and craters and stuff, you can tell that they are in a battlefield. So you're instantly getting an insight to the story in perhaps a 10cm radius, and even with the smaller HQ units you can have it in like a 42mm radius or whatever. You know, the different base sizes. Point is, you can tell a story in a really small space. Another thing that I think is really important about basing is it's a whole different creative pursuit. It's not just painting a pre-sculpted miniature, it's more like kit bashing, which is a different part of the hobby, which I personally would really like to get into, but have never really been brave enough to chop up miniatures and like mash them together and stuff. Anyway, I digress. My point is, creating bases can be very different to painting your miniatures, because you're going to be using different types of materials like your sands and your stones, and maybe some texture paints and whatnot, using different types of glues. Where you might only use plastic glue on your miniatures, you'll be using super glue and PVA glue and stuff on the base. You're going to be using grass tufts, you're going to be using cork and bark and loads of other materials, even paper clips or guitar strings for wires. There's an endless amount of stuff that you can do to make a base really come to life, and you're going to be using a lot of other things that you don't normally use in the hobby. As a result, you're going to be learning to use a load more things, and I think learning to use more things will help you grow as a miniature artist a lot quicker. As I said in one of my previous videos, the best way I think to improve when it comes to painting or basing is to do different things. If you introduce a variety, you're going to be experiencing new things all the time, which will force you to grow. If you'd like to watch that video, I will pop it up in a card in the corner or down in the description below. Now the third point is potentially the most obvious, but it's actually one of the most important in my opinion. When you have a large scale army, I think it's really important to contextualize them and make it seem as if all the miniatures belong in the same place, like they exist on the same world, in the same battlefield. And you do that by having a unifying basing scheme. Now this doesn't mean that every single base has to be the same, but it needs to be quite similar. So one miniature can just have a sandy base with a set colour, and then another miniature could have a really rocky base with some skulls and a couple grass tufts and stuff. But if you're going to be using the same colour scheme, it will unify them and make them seem as if though they exist side by side, and it won't look weird at all. It just happens to be that I'm stood on a flat surface and my buddy here has a rock underneath him and a skull. Let's not worry about the skull too much. We are in battle after all. And the last thing about basing is you can directly incorporate it into the main paint scheme of your model. If you're doing non-metallic metals, you can use the environment, aka the base, to dictate what colours you're going to be reflecting on the underside of these metals. Because when looking at real reflective metals in the real world, you will notice that colours are reflected on it as well. It's not just grey and white like we tend to do when we're doing NMM. Instead, if you're stood on a grassy field, for the most part, it will be a shiny silvery white thingy, but there will be a green tint to the underside. Now this obviously depends on how you want to do non-metallic metals, but there are other ways you can incorporate the base into your main paint scheme as well. For example, if you want to do an object source lighting effect, where an item on your miniature is glowing, to make it seem like it's glowing, you will be using the main colour of the glowing item on other areas of the model as well, because that light is bouncing onto it, and therefore you can have it bouncing onto the ground too, tinting the ground and making that object source lighting effect more effective. Another way you can do this is with water effects. I'm quite fond of using the odd bit of slime, and on some of my bases I have made a little pond in a base. So the thing we do in sci-fi models is most of them are metallic, so to make it look like it's wet, all I need to do is put a gloss varnish on it. But if I was doing a more fantasy-based games where people are wearing actual clothes, like cloth stuff and whatnot, you can do your water effects on the base and then try and keep that in mind when painting by making like the lower half of the leg quite dark, where he's obviously been wading through deeper water or something. You can really use things on your base to help influence your paint scheme as well. Now, whilst I've been rabbiting on, you've been watching me paint this deffkilla wartrike base, and now I want you to have a look, because I've got to say I am pretty proud of how this thing turned out, and I think it's a good addition to my warg. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any thoughts on basing or anything at all to do with the channel, please leave it in the comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more of my videos on a semi-regular basis. There are a few links in the description down below if you want to support the channel in other ways, but until next time, thanks for watching and see you later.